Today we begin a new section of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which deals with forbidden wines, which is obviously something which is very relevant, not just as far as if you want to have a cup of wine, but also often wine could be added to many other foods as well. So if you were ever wondering why some orange juice on the shelf doesn't have a based-in stamp where the apple juice does, and you're wondering why if it's the same company and the company is being certified for the apple juice, why wouldn't they be certified for the orange juice too? So what could be is that the line that produces the orange juice also produces some type of grape juice. Halachically, yayin in Hebrew refers to both wine and grape juice. They are pretty much the same thing. The only difference is that wine is a more honored drink than grape juice, but otherwise, whenever we speak about wine, grape juice, the same applies to that. So the prohibitions against wine or grape juice apply not only to wine or grape juice, but they actually affect many fruit juices that you may want to drink. They may have some ingredients from grape, which would make them not kosher. Not only fruit juices, but even flavorants. Nowadays, most flavoring is artificial, but sometimes you could have certain products that are not kosher. Why? Believe it or not, because included in that product is some grape juice. Let's hear all about that. So before we go straight into forbidden wines, let's just take a moment at where we're looking at where we're up to in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. We are still on the section of meals and food. We're going through the day. So we woke up, we got dressed like a Jew, we davened like a Jew, we learned something, we conducting ourselves towards each other like a Jew, we prepared our food, we're eating our meal, and next we could discuss blessings and then moving on to business. But for now, we are on the last section of meals and food, and that is forbidden wines. Let's now take a look at the text. Okay, so maybe before we go straight into the text, I could just give a few words of introduction. One of the mitzvahs in the Torah, and it's a pretty serious mitzvah, is the prohibition against serving idols. In fact, it's in the first two of the 10 commandments. I am Hashem your God, and you shall have no other gods. And there are actually maybe as many as 20, 30, or 40 mitzvahs. I don't remember exactly how many. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but there are many mitzvahs, that is individual mitzvahs that all relate to the prohibition against serving any other deity other than God, against serving idols. So included in the prohibition is not only to serve the idol, but also one may not have any benefit from an idol or anything that was served to an idol. As I mentioned a few times, in Judaism, we know that the greater something has the potential to be good, the more potential something has on the positive side, the more potential it has on the negative side. So and that could apply to so many things, but wine is no exception. Wine features quite prevalently in Yiddishkeit, in the Torah. Many occasions are done over a cup of wine, a wedding, a Shabbos meal. And because wine has this added spiritual power, so the negative energies of the world also try to grab onto the same energy. And therefore, wine can also be used for negative things. So wine was a chief form of serving idols. The idolaters would pour wine on the idol. They would serve wine to the idol. So wine had a strong connection to idolatry. Now, if a human being was to take a cup of wine and offer it, instead of using it to make Kiddush on Shabbos, they took the cup of wine and lahabdil, they served it to their idol, then that wine, one may have no benefit from it. It is absolutely not kosher. I mean, just to bear in mind, there are only 3 mitzvahs of the Torah where a person should rather die than transgress those mitzvahs. And one of the 3 mitzvahs where a person should rather die than transgress it is to bow down to an idol. So this is pretty serious. And what that means is that in no way could we have any benefit from anything that was served to an idol. So if a cup of wine or a bottle of wine was used for some other god or idol, then it would be not kosher. It's not kosher because of the ingredients, but it's not kosher because of what was done to it. Now, the rabbis took it a stage further. The rabbi said that since it is so common and so popular for non-Jews to grab any wine they see and to immediately have in mind that they will use this to serve it to their gods, to their idols, therefore, any wine that is handled by a non-Jew is not kosher. Why? Because when he was handling it, we're concerned that he maybe have in mind that he's using this for idolatrous purposes. We can't read his mind. We need to stay on the side of caution. So we're not saying that necessarily that is what he had in mind, but since it may be what he had in mind, therefore any wine handled by a non-Jew becomes instantly not kosher by rabbinic decree out of a concern that it might be scripturally not kosher by the Torah itself if the person had in mind to serve it to an idol. Once the rabbis instituted the decree, even if the reason doesn't seem to apply, in this instance, even if you're in a society where people don't believe in any gods and certainly no idols, still once they laid a rule, we keep to it. And at least my understanding of the reason for this is that there are reasons that are known to us and there are reasons that are not known to us. So even if the reasons that are known to us seem to have fallen away, there are additional reasons that are not known to us. Now, I'm going through a few of the points outside and then we can look at them all inside. So there is one good thing, and that is that not all wine qualifies for idolatrous purposes. If you're, and you should never be, but if you've learned anything about idolatry, you would know that any wine that has been cooked is reduced in its level of specialty. And once the wine is cooked, it would no longer be served to an idol. Therefore, any wine that is cooked remains kosher, even if it was handled by a non-Jew. Because although the rabbis instituted that any wine handled by a non-Jew becomes non-kosher, they only instituted this law with regards to wines that have the ability to be served as an idol, to serve to an idol. Since cooked wine does not qualify to be served to an idol, therefore cooked wine handled by a non-Jew is kosher. In Hebrew, this is called mevushal. Now, what that practically means is most kosher wines that you'll see in the grocery store will say on them mevushal. If it says mevushal, it means it's already been cooked. The wine was cooked before it was bottled. If the wine was already cooked, then it's okay for you to leave it open in the house. Because even if it's handled by non-Jews in the home, then that does not disqualify it because it's not regular wine, it's cooked wine. However, if the bottle of wine has a kosher certification followed by the words not mevushal, it means that the wine was not cooked, in which case, if that wine, the moment the seal is broken, is handled by a non-Jew, the wine will become not kosher. So this is pretty much the outline in my own words. Now let's take a look at what it says in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Okay. Are you just seeing the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch right now? Ah, there we go. Okay.
We can see you as well, Rabbi.
Right, via the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. That's great. I see over here, as I'm looking at my notes, that there was another reason that the rabbis forbade wines of a non-Jew, and that was actually to prevent intermarriage. Obviously, wine brings to a lot of socializing and comfortability. And so as a way to prevent intermarriage, they said that if we don't drink each other's wines, it automatically causes some level of separation so that we respect each other, but we also know each other's place and that we don't intermarry. Okay. In the opinion of some authorities, at our time, the wine of a non-Jew or Jewish wine touched by a non-Jew is forbidden only for drinking, but not for deriving other benefit from it. So just to explain what that means, were the wine to have been served to an idol, then not only can't one drink it, but one can't even benefit from it. You wouldn't even be allowed to sell it. But since most people today do not use wine to serve it to idols, therefore you wouldn't be allowed to drink it because the rabbis made that decree, but the decree was against drinking it. But as far as benefiting it, you would be allowed to benefit from it unless you knew that it actually was used for idolatrous purposes. Therefore, a Jew is permitted to take non-Jewish wine in payment of a debt, for it is equivalent to saving it from a loss. The same law applies in avoiding other types of loss, but only when, for example, the wine was already purchased. However, initially it is forbidden to buy such wine in order to make a profit from it. So we have a principle which I already mentioned earlier, which is that a person is not allowed to make money off non-kosher food. This is something that the rabbis instituted, perhaps to prevent a person from coming to eat it himself. So at the outset, you wouldn't be allowed to go ahead and buy non-kosher wines in order to sell them. And even though you're not eating it and you're only making money, we still have the principle that any food that is not kosher may not be used as a form of business. However, if it was a matter of rescuing something, like you're just being paid back a debt, then you would be allowed to accept it. Some authorities are lenient even in this instance, but it is best to follow the stricter opinions. And some people say that since this wine was only rabbinically forbidden, so you would be allowed to trade, but one should rather follow the more stringent opinion, which is to avoid doing business with even non-kosher wine. Now, it is permissible to make a bath from non-Jewish wine for a sick person, although he is not critically ill. So that's quite an interesting one. I haven't heard it being done today, but apparently that had some kind of remedial effect. It was able to remedy a person. So again, since, to clarify, I don't know if I was clear enough, so let me just repeat it again. If the wine was actually served as an offering to an idol, then you are allowed to have no benefit from it. However, if it was never served to an idol, it was just handled by a non-Jew. So now it's only a concern that perhaps he may have had in mind while handling it that he's serving it to an idol. So then we could assume that it wasn't actually served to an idol, and therefore, although one is not allowed to drink it, one is allowed to benefit from such wine. And therefore, you would be able to bathe if your doctor said so. Yeah, I would recommend you seek proper medical advice, but it would be permissible to bathe in wine of a non-Jew. Even though you can't drink it, you can benefit from it. Okay, kosher wine that was cooked until it was brought to a boil and its contents reduced by the boiling. Even if it was touched by a non-Jew, it is permissible even for drinking. However, wine into which spices have been put, such as vermouth, as long as it is still cold wine and has not been boiled, becomes forbidden when touched by a non-Jew. So boiling is what makes it no longer forbidden if it's boiled before it was handled by a non-Jew. But by putting in other spices, that doesn't stop it from being called wine. It's still called wine, and therefore, if it's handled by a non-Jew, it becomes not kosher. So I'm just looking at my notes as we go along, because the last time I taught this, I actually did a lot of research on the subject. And here we go, halacha dalet. In addition to which wine was added, but is not discernible, even if it was not yet brought to a boil, does not become forbidden when touched by a non-Jew. Meaning that if you took a little bit of uncooked wine and you added it to a dressing, and then that dressing went into a salad, and then a non-Jew handled the salad, that will not make the salad non-kosher. It's specifically when they're handling wine, not that when they're handling food into which wine was already mixed in. Okay, wine that was diluted with 6 parts of water is no longer considered wine and does not become forbidden when touched by a non-Jew. However, raisin wine, which is made by pouring wine and raisins, is considered real wine. So at a certain point, it becomes flavored water. It's no longer wine, at which point the prohibition of the sages would not apply. One final point of mixing mead, which is made from water poured on the seeds or on the lees of wine, as long as it is improved for drinking, cannot be permitted when touched by a non-Jew. So again, it's not. We don't just look at it as flavored water. Rather, we look at it as a wine drink, and therefore, if touched by a non-Jew, that would be a problem. Okay, now what does it mean that it's touched by a non-Jew? So the next few halachas, halachas 6, 7, 8, and 9, talks about different ways that the non-Jew may have handled the wine. Number 7, once even a small quantity of wine has been drawn from a barrel in which grapes were pressed, or if wine was taken from it in a vessel, the entire contents of the barrel is considered wine and becomes forbidden when touched by a non-Jew, even if he touched only the seeds and the husks. Therefore, barrels of grapes found in the house of a non-Jew are forbidden, since he might have already drawn wine from them. Meaning, if you just crush grapes before any wine has been drawn from it, you might still just look at it as crushed grapes. It doesn't yet take on the halachic status of wine, which would be offered to an idol. But the moment any wine has been drawn from it, then, or if the grapes were pressed, not just crushed but pressed, then at that point, the wine will become not kosher. It's also forbidden to let a non-Jew press grapes, even if the barrel is sealed. This has led to great controversies in Israel, where there's the big continuous debates of the law of return to Israel. Israel says that every Jew is automatically granted citizenship to Israel. So how do you define a Jew? So unfortunately, although when it comes to marriages, divorces, in many instances, the law of the land is governed by the Torah, when it comes to who is defined as a Jew, the state of Israel, to the best of my knowledge, they do not follow the guidelines of the Torah. They say rather anybody who either of their parents was Jewish, we will consider them Jewish as far as giving them citizenship, even though they're not. So this has caused a big issue, because if you have a big, Israel is famous for its wines. So if you have a big wine, forgot what the word is, but if you have a big wine company, and so you need to ensure that all of your workers are Jewish, because if one of the workers that are pressing the grapes is not Jewish, then it causes all of the wine to become non-kosher. Now the person, sorry?
Like the Ethiopians.
So that's where a big question comes up. If somebody came to Israel and is not halachically considered Jewish, but the state considers them Jewish, so then if you are going to say that you can't hire them for a job, it could be viewed as racism. Obviously, it's nothing to do with skin color. It has to do with are they halachically, are they defined as a Jew by Torah guidelines as far as this being kosher under Torah guidelines. So that has caused big controversies in Israel, just mentioning it because it's interesting. But I guess this is part 1 of discovering quite a rather interesting section of kosher, and that is the laws of wine. So just to sum it up, tachlis, bottom line, the only way you could really drink any bottle of grape juice or wine is if it has a kosher certification. And kosher certification does not just mean that the ingredients are kosher, but it means that the rabbi ensured that it was not handled by a non-Jew before it was cooked. And then you'll look on the bottle, and if it says it's not mevushal, it wasn't cooked, then it means even now you need to make sure to drink it all up the moment you open it before it gets handled by anybody that would disqualify the wine. if it says muvushal, if it was already cooked, then at that point it is like any other drink, and there is no concern, no problem of a non-Jew touching it. Thank you so much for joining me for wine in class. Excuse the pun.